Hey everyone, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. There was an interview hosted by Broadband.Money with Evan Feinman, director of the BEAD program, where he answered some questions and went into some details on some things that might be of interest. So we'll be right back and I'll talk about that. Thanks for joining me. Rick Uzzi here with Broadband Deployment News. So as I mentioned, there was a interview that was done, and there's a video of it. So in the description of this video, I've got a link to this summary here, and then also where you can actually watch the full interview. It was something where Gary Bolton, the CEO of Fiber Broadband Association, interviewed Evan Feinman and asked some questions regarding the BEAD program. It was supposed to be about matching funds, but he also went into some other things that would be of interest if you're looking at BEAD and going to be participating in that, whether you're a state or what would be considered an eligible entity or the grantee. You're going to be receiving the funds directly from the NTIA, or whether you're a sub-grantee, somebody like an internet service provider. I think this would be of interest. So, and this is a very good summary here where they have the top 10 takeaways from the BEAD director, Evan Feinman, deep dive on matching funds. But as I mentioned, it's more than just the matching funds that they covered in that. So see here, Evan Feinman, director of the $42.5 billion BEAD program. That's the interview was with him. So the next big milestone, he mentioned getting fully staffed, which should happen in the coming weeks. So they're still staffing up, and that's going to be followed by a June 30th, 2023 declaration as to how the $42.5 billion will be divided among the 56 states, territories, and tribal governments. So each state is going to get $100 million as their minimum allocation, and then based on the number of unserved locations they have compared to the rest of the country, they will get either a different amount, quite a bit more for states like Georgia, for example, and Texas. Texas, I believe, in the last thing I saw that was kind of estimating, was kind of the top state that would get the most amount of money. So it depends on how many unserved locations they have. And then also the territories are going to split. They split the $100 million for their allotment, their minimum allotment, and they'll get some percentage based on their percentage as well. So all of that's being looked at, and it's going to be based on the FCC maps, or I should say the next national broadband map, showing who's unserved in the country, and I'm assuming the territories as well. So that's going to play into that, and that should be coming out sometime in May, I think. Right now, internet service providers are finishing up hopefully finishing up their filing in the broadband data collection system. This is the second filing they have to do in that system. They did one between June and September of last year, and we know that was brand new, and we know a lot of ISPs made mistakes with that, and also there were a lot of mistakes on the map. There were a lot of locations that were not listed on the map, so a lot of that's been fixed. Again, hopefully a lot of the challenges have been done on the locations on the map, and there are ISPs now that realize they didn't have locations listed prior that now have realized, oh, wait a minute, we didn't do the filing right, or we never did the filing, something like that. So they're fixing that. So there are going to be locations on the map that are going to be much better in May. How close it is to perfect, I don't know, but it'll be much closer than it was prior to that. So that's all taking place. And then on June 30th, based on that information, the NTIA is going to come out and say how much each state gets. So that's the next big milestone. The FCC's controversial national broadband map will not be the only or even primary source by which areas will be evaluated for broadband funding needs. So that's an important distinction. So the NTIA is going to use that map. I haven't heard anything different. The NTIA is going to use that map to determine how much each state is going to get. But then the state, from there, doesn't need to rely on that map solely as to where they're going to allocate funds. So if they know for a fact that there's something that was not taken into account in the map, where the map says it's served and it's not served, then the states can provide information on that. And hopefully the map is not that far off as we get to this next iteration, the first production iteration in May. Hopefully most of the huge location challenges have been completed and determined to be good or not good, whatever, where states were saying, oh, there's 10, 20,000 locations that aren't right. Hopefully a lot of that's going to be off the table, off the map, and those will now be correct. And then hopefully there will be not too many places where ISPs have put information where they say they're providing service at a certain speed and they're not, as far as those that really matter. And what I mean by that is that's going to be only those locations where it's kind of on the cusp of unserved or underserved. So 25 by 3 or 100 by 20, kind of those locations where there's only one provider and they're saying that they offer a certain speed when maybe they don't. There are challenges on that now. Consumers have been challenging that. Other entities, states, communities, and other stakeholders have been challenging that information. So hopefully a lot of that gets worked out as well. And we don't have anything huge left that's going to really make a big difference on how much each state gets. Okay, so each state hopefully will be getting the amount that they're supposed to get, because the percentage of errors is going to be much smaller. Now, again, there are going to be some areas where it could be a neighborhood where it says it's served and it's not really served, and the states can challenge that. You see, your communities will be able to bring forth large numbers of aggregated speed tests, not individual speed tests. So in other words, a consumer, I don't think, can do an individual speed test, and the FCC can't look at each one of those. But if there's compelling evidence that there's a major issue, communities can get involved in that, and they can use existing state maps, which a lot of states are using money right now. They're planning funds to be able to create those, and already have created those. And other tests, propagation maps, scrape data from ISP websites saying they don't actually serve that area, and they'll be able to ground truth in those FCC maps. So in other words, if there are these problems in isolated areas, or maybe some larger areas that look like they're wrong, the community, the states that are going to be allocating those funds don't necessarily need to rely totally on the FCC maps. They can go based on data that they have that's a little bit closer to the ground there, in order to be able to correct those things. There's no magic number for the right amount of matching funding, but more is always better. So obviously more is better because the money goes further. So if ISPs, as they compete for these funds, these will be competitive kinds of grants. So when a state says we need a particular area of service, there are going to be some subgrantees that are going to step up and say they want to do it. And maybe some will offer a greater match than others. It needs to be at least 25%. Funding secured by the recipient. However, there will be exceptions on a case-by-case basis, especially for locations where the underlying economic value is low. So there are difficult areas to serve, which is why we're doing this, right? There are areas where it's just not economically feasible for a private company to go in and provide internet service because they don't get a return on their investment, because there's not that many customers there, or maybe there's a lot of people, but there's not a lot of people that want internet, or really more likely could afford it at what the price would be if you had to put internet there, because again, it's an expensive area to serve. Or it could be that there's a lot of people there and there's just not a lot of people that can afford the service. So these are areas where the economic value doesn't make sense for an ISP. We can waive the match all the way down to zero, so that is an option for the state. And the state can do that, and then the NTIA would have to approve that through when they look at the plan. Feinman said that, as well as noting that in such areas, the NTIA would look at qualifying to receive a higher level of Affordable Connectivity Program discount eligibility from the FCC, up to $75 per month off a broadband internet bill per household instead of the ACP's usual $30. And I didn't quite understand this because, that's not written into the law as far as I know. So the ACP, basically, it's not based on the area and how expensive it is to serve, or matching funds or anything like that. It's something for low income households only, because the households have to qualify to get an ACP kind of subsidy, and it's $30 or $75 if it happens to be on tribal land. So I don't know how much flexibility they have on this. And he's not with the FCC, and the FCC is managing the ACP program, so he may not know for sure. But I'd find it odd that you could do that to the ACP, especially at this late date when the funds are quickly going away. It could be something that in the future we need to come up with some other way to fund the ACP, either again through Congress extending it for some period of time, making it permanent, or my preference would be to make it somehow like the USF fund, Universal Service Fund, where consumers who can afford broadband help to pay for those who can't. Because then we're not adding to the debt and the deficit in this country, which has gotten ridiculous to the point now where we're going to have a hard time servicing the debt that we have. And, we don't want to be throwing any more money at things these days, especially with inflation and whatnot. So my preference is that it be something like the USF. But again, I don't think there's the leeway in the ACP to be able to do that. Feinman noted that the grant seekers who do manage to scrape together matching funding will be better positioned to receive the grant money. So again, these are going to be competitive grants. So those that can provide a greater match could have an edge there. Of course, the state hopefully will be looking at other things like just because you can get a greater match, are these people as capable as others that are going to be doing the service? So those are all important things to take into account. Which states have considerable latitude? While states have considerable latitude, the number one attribute is minimizing cost to the taxpayer. Great way to do that is to bring more match to the table. So yes, so the funds go further if we can get service providers to have a greater stake in that. It's a little more difficult these days because the cost of capital has gone up since all of this was passed. The cost of materials has gone up. Hopefully some of that is easing. The actual costs of goods have gone down a bit. The rate of inflation is not quite as bad as it has been. So hopefully there will be costs going down and maybe some other pressures that will bring costs down during the process. But these days it's a little bit more expensive. That makes it harder, obviously, for people to do a higher match because their costs have gone up. Matching funding can come from many places, but ARPA funding is one great source to start. Sourcing can come from a wide range of places, including other federal programs, state general funds, local general funds, private funding, nonprofits or charitable organizations, and others. So a lot of states have been using ARPA to be able to fund broadband projects. That was the American Recovery Plan Act. It was part of that coronavirus package that passed. It included huge amounts of money, $350 million. We're talking about $350 billion, I believe, in the local fiscal recovery part of that, and then $10 billion in the capital projects fund. So, and states have been getting money from both of those. So it was not limited. It was meant for infrastructure kinds of things, but broadband was something that could be done using those funds. And a lot of states have focused on broadband because that's where they had a need. They noticed the need after the pandemic, during the pandemic, and then after. So lots of money has already been allocated to states. They've been, tens of millions of dollars or more, hundreds of millions in some cases, states have used to be able to take those ARPA funds and already start the process of getting broadband deployed in unserved and underserved areas. And what they're saying here is that you don't need to necessarily even use those funds to deploy broadband. You could use them as a matching fund. So a state could say, could take some of their ARPA funds if they have some left, and they could have a kind of a fund that they would use for matching funds to help internet service providers or the subgrantees be able to do a greater match. So the subgrantee could apply for that as their matching funds using ARPA, and then they get the other funds from BEAD, and that way they can, again, help afford to deploy in these areas that are difficult to deploy and expensive to deploy. Potential grant recipients shouldn't worry too much about the Build and Buy American requirements. So in the Infrastructure Act and in the NOFO, it talks about having to buy American, and it's pretty laid out. You got to buy American. But obviously, if something's not available here, or if it's just going to be ridiculously expensive to get it here, then we need some leeway there, and it sounds like there is. Feinman said there would be allowances made for some foreign products and services to be used in BEAD-funded projects, and obviously they're not going to be allowing probably gear like Huawei and ZTE that's already on a list of equipment that can't be used from China, for example, where there might be some influence from China or spying, those kinds of things. But there could be opportunities for foreign sourced material, whatever it might be, if it's, again, something that you can't get in the U.S. or you can't get reasonably priced in the U.S. He said, while there will be a more concrete guidance issued to folks well prior to anyone's need to begin to engineer potential broadband projects, there would be domain flexibility applied to the kinds of equipment needed to complete broadband build-outs in different locations. Specific categories of situations and products that can be sourced out of the United States. So again, they're hopefully going to be, as he says here, we're going to reach as good an accommodation of those values as we can, and we're going to be able to support folks to follow them, he said. So again, you've got to kind of balance that. Yeah, we want to try to buy American because we want to source the goods here in this country and be able to support jobs, American jobs here, but also we need to be prudent in the fact that we don't want something to cost way more. If we're going to do that, it'd be better to be able to deploy broadband in more locations than have to buy American if the price is out of whack. So, and that will help drive prices down here if we've got that competitive situation going on. There are a lot of different ways to get an in-kind donation. Anything that has value in the marketplace can be used as an in-kind contribution. So that means the in-kind contribution stuff would be where if you're a provider and there's certain things that normally you would get paid for if you were going to be like pole access or something like that, that could be an in-kind contribution where you provide your own pole access. Or maybe somebody can donate that, and that can be an in-kind contribution. So donate, it says don't donate a Picasso to the broadband office. That's funny. But fiber, labor, pole rights can be a contribution. If you've got fiber that you want to donate, if you've got labor that you can donate, if you've got access to rights of way, they have a regular pricing schedule. It's easy to capture. I also mentioned waive, make ready, or pole attachment fees. So these are all things that normally there would be a cost associated with, but if that can be donated or waived or those kinds of things, that can be an in-kind contribution that can help go towards the match, for example, or what you're going to have to pay out of pocket. The NTIA is standing firm on its insistence that waiving the letters of credit requirement will be relatively rare. So there is a letter of credit requirement that every subgrantee will have to have, and that is not that hard for some operators, but for smaller operators, that can be difficult. So many smaller providers view this as an insurmountable obstacle. Feinman acknowledged that this requirement would limit the universe of providers applying for BEAD grants, but he said that it's important to minimize the failure rate. And that's true. I mean, again, you're trying to balance the fact that we don't want to give money to a company that's going to fail. And we want to have something kind of backing that up, this letter of credit. It would be tough for us to justify giving $100 million subgrants to a 3-person shop, he said. There will be opportunities for folks to seek waivers to that requirement, but those waivers are going to be pretty tightly controlled. And I don't think you're going to see 3-man shops, but there are a lot of maybe 15, 20, 30-man shops out there. These are not your Comcast or your regional ISPs. These are mom and pop independent cable operators or phone companies or fiber operators that are maybe operating in one small area. They might be operating in one town or city, and they would be well suited to extend their infrastructure maybe into an area right now that's underserved or unserved. Or maybe they are in an area where they're having a hard time upgrading because, again, they're in an area where it's difficult and expensive to serve, so maybe they could use the funds even to upgrade their own area. But if they've got to get this letter of credit, then that does not help them. And a lot of these companies do really well at what they do. So they've been serving, again, take a cable operator maybe that maybe is serving an area. Maybe they're providing good speeds and services in their town, and they'd like to extend a little bit further out on the edge of their territory. They like to edge out their service area, but maybe they're only a company of 30 people, and that's including office people and technicians and head-end engineers and others. So for them to get a letter of credit might be kind of difficult, but yet they're really well suited to be able to serve that territory adjacent to them. And if they're providing good service in one area and they can get federal assistance to help them build out in that other area, they should have a good shot at being successful. And but if the letter of credit stops them, then that's not good. So hopefully they'll be looked at, as he mentions here, they'll be tightly controlled, but hopefully they'll look at those individual situations at those companies and look at their financials. I'm sure they'll have certain things they got to do, like look at financials, but look at their history. If they've been in business since 1950 and they've been providing broadband service since 2000 or something like that, then they should be considered and possibly be able to get that letter of credit waived as long as the state and the NTIA takes a close look at them. States must show the NTIA how their grant programs will prioritize unserved locations first. And that is a requirement that the unserved locations, those that are less than 25 by 3, have to be served first. But see, there's a mix of unserved and underserved kind of in the same areas a lot of times, and there's also community anchor institutions that need to be looked at. So they need to make sure, though, when they do their plan, when the state does their plan, that it's supposed to be where it serves every unserved location first. But there should be enough money to be able to handle a lot of unserved locations, underserved locations as well. And that's going to be all done probably not in little chunks. So it's not going to be, okay, we're going to get all our unserved stuff. We're going to get the money for that. And then we're going to take money and do underserved locations. I don't think it's going to be like that. States are going to put together a plan that gets as many unserved and underserved locations covered as possible, with as much as possible covered by fiber. And it's very possible to be able to do all of that with the money that they're going to be granted because of things like ARPA and RDOF and all those other funds that are still coming out, plus the matching funds and whatnot, plus other areas that are going to be served by other technologies in the meantime that maybe the state will decide they don't need to grant funds there. There might be, if the state sees that maybe there's a broadband project that didn't get started before the end of last year, well, it doesn't qualify for appearing on the next map, the FCC map. But if that project gets started this month and then it's planned to be finished before, let's say, the end of the year, then I'm sure the state's going to take a look at that and go, you know what, this is a project that's already started. Even if it's funded by private dollars and not federal funds, they're not going to want to overbuild an area that's suddenly got fiber and then put more fiber in there. So there's going to be lots of areas even like that will be, even though they'll be not on the FCC map as far as the allocation of dollars for the state can decide, you know what, that area is going to be covered. We don't need to spend the money there. We need to look at other areas and get these other unserved areas and underserved areas covered first. And I put down what the NOFO says here on unserved and underserved. So it says the eligible entity, that would be the state, may seek proposals to serve unserved locations, underserved locations, and CAIs, that's community anchor institutions, collectively or separately. I think collectively is going to be the main way that states do this. So long as the eligible entity awards funding in a manner that prioritizes unserved service projects, and once it certifies that it will ensure coverage of all unserved locations within the eligible entity or within the state, prioritizes unserved service projects. So unserved's got to be covered, but they can make sure that they put all of this together to be able to do that. And an unserved service project or an underserved service project can be as small as one household. So the requirement in the NOFO says that it's supposed to have at least 80% of that particular kind of category. So an unserved service project needs to be at least 80% or no less than 80% of the households in that area need to be unserved, for example. But an unserved service project can be one household. So if there's an issue with trying to work all of this out, where how do we find these blocks of 80% and how do we work it all out? It doesn't matter. If you've got two homes sitting off the track somewhere on the other side of the tracks where they're unserved or underserved, each one of those or those two households, if they're close enough together, can be one unserved service project or underserved service project, depending on the speed. So there's some leeway there. States that want to race ahead can get their in-state challenge process approved early. So this is good to know that states, because states are going to want to get this money as quickly as they can. States that want to push the envelope on time can get their challenge process approved early and then run their challenge process concurrent to our review of the rest of their initial proposal, Feinman said. So the states are going to do their proposals, and while the NTIA is reviewing those, they can get their challenge process approved to kind of grease the skids and get that stuff out of the way. The BEAD program allows states to establish their own rules by which local entities can challenge the accuracy of the state broadband maps. The NTIA staff will be working with the state broadband offices all summer to help them develop these proposals, Feinman said. States that enact policies that conflict with federal infrastructure law will freeze broadband funding rollout. So I don't know specifically what they're talking about here. It mentions, says finally answering a question about Texas, but without addressing any state specifically. Feinman noted that state governments would be wise not to enact any policies that conflicted with the BEAD Notice of Funding Opportunity and its requirements. as this could result in broadband offices being paralyzed from deploying BEAD funding, even if they were awarded it. So they may be talking there about maybe some state requirements for, hang on one second, let me get this back up. I saw a chat here. State requirements for, that maybe have something that says that you cannot deploy broadband or that you cannot give funds to a municipality. That's what I was thinking. This could be something where maybe a state has laws where municipality cannot get broadband funding at all, or maybe there's certain provisions where they can only get it in a certain case. They can only provide broadband, or it could be others like electric utilities. So those things are not supposed to be allowed in the NOFO. That nobody's supposed to be off the table here. If an electric co-op wants to get these funds, or a municipality wants to get these funds, some other community institution, or a government institution, that's supposed to be allowed, and those laws would conflict. So I guess they're saying here that states, something like that, they don't want to do that, because that could, even if they were to get funding, then they couldn't use them or couldn't roll it out. So I see Conway Fan 98, something I found interesting is that on the current FCC map, it shows my area is served with 25.3 licensed fixed wireless. However, that provider told my state they don't serve my area. The FCC map states that the same provider told my state's data collection that they don't serve my location. Okay, so it's very possible that that will be corrected in the next map, but certainly you can go in and challenge that if you haven't already. I think maybe you did. I mentioned this before, but you can go on to the broadband map and challenge that and say, I call this provider and they say they do not provide that. And that's the kind of thing, again, that's the cusp of the broadband unserved, where somebody's saying they provide 25.3 and they don't. And if it's fixed wireless and it's licensed spectrum, then that theoretically could mean that that would be counted as served when the NTIA looks at the percentage of unserved locations in your state versus the rest of the country. And that could impact the amount of money that your state gets. However, as mentioned earlier, your state doesn't necessarily, that doesn't mean that your state has to look at that on the FCC map and say, okay, well, it says 25.3 is here, so we can't do anything with that money. They can get information from folks like you and others in the area, just kind of anecdotal information, and then again, look at speed tests, like not your own speed tests, but group speed tests and group information about that particular area, and go, you know what, this area, well, there's somebody on here on the map that says it's 25.3. We know for a fact it's not. We've talked to the service provider. They say it's not there, so they can actually allocate those funds there. So shouldn't be an issue, but yeah, it's good that you know that. So you're on top of it, and it's great that you have seen that that's not going to be the case. So thanks for joining me. And if this was interesting or helpful, if you give me a like on the video, I will be back, not tomorrow, but I'll be back Wednesday with another edition of Broadband Deployment News. Hope to see you then. Bye-bye.